I never imagined that a patch of grass would teach my neighbor a lesson that 14 certified letters never could, but that's exactly what happened. By the time it was over, he had quietly paid every dollar I asked for. Not because I yelled louder than he did, but because every careless shortcut he took across my property had been waiting for him on camera. Looking back now, I honestly think the money wasn't what bothered him the most. It was realizing that every single weekend he had assumed nobody was paying attention. My name is Ethan Calloway, and about 3 years ago, I bought a corner lot in a quiet subdivision just outside Franklin Ridge, a place where everyone smiled, waved, and pretended to respect one another's property until it became slightly inconvenient. The house itself wasn't anything extraordinary, but the yard was what sold me. The side lawn stretched nearly 50 feet from the sidewalk to the fence line, perfectly level, covered in thick Bermuda grass that had clearly been cared for long before I ever moved in. Some people spend weekends golfing, some spend them fishing. Me, I liked working outside. There is something satisfying about seeing clean edges along the sidewalk, evenly cut stripes after mowing, and sprinklers coming on just before sunrise. During my first spring there, I spent 3 entire weekends digging trenches with a rented machine, laying PVC pipe by hand, connecting sprinkler heads one by one, testing every zone until the water pressure came out exactly right. My wife, Emily, joked that I treated the lawn like another member of the family. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Every dollar I spent on fertilizer, every afternoon spent pulling weeds, every scraped knuckle from installing the irrigation system made that yard feel earned. More importantly, every inch of it belonged to us. Before closing on the house, I'd paid for a full property survey. Bright orange markers still sat buried near each corner, and the side yard everyone could see from the street was completely inside our lot. There wasn't a shared easement. There wasn't a public access strip. There wasn't any confusion about where my property ended. Then there was my neighbor, Travis Mercer. Travis owned the house directly behind mine, and if confidence could make noise, his lifted black pickup truck would have been the loudest thing in the county. Giant off-road tires, aftermarket suspension, oversized exhaust. You could hear him coming long before you saw him. At first, I actually liked the guy. We talked over the fence once or twice. He borrowed my ladder during his roof repair and even returned it cleaner than when he borrowed it. So when I noticed tire marks cutting across the edge of my lawn one Saturday morning, I figured maybe someone had accidentally driven too wide while backing up. I filled the ruts with fresh soil, spread grass seed, watered the area, and forgot about it. The next weekend, the same thing happened. This time I happened to glance outside Friday evening just as Travis swung his truck around the corner. Instead of backing carefully into his own driveway, he simply drove across the corner of my yard, shaved several feet off his turn, and rolled straight into his garage like he'd used that route his entire life. I actually stood there holding a coffee mug, waiting for him to realize what he'd done. He never even looked toward my house. Monday evening, I walked over while he was washing his truck. "Hey, Travis," I said with a smile, "would you mind staying off the grass when you pull in? Those tires are tearing it up." He barely glanced at me before shrugging. "It's just grass, Ethan. It'll grow back." I laughed politely because I thought maybe he was joking. "Sure, but it's my grass." He rinsed the side of his truck without missing a beat. "You're making a bigger deal out of it than it is." That sentence stayed with me much longer than it probably should have. Not because it was insulting, but because it told me exactly how he viewed the situation. To him, my property wasn't really mine if using it made his life easier. The following Friday, I watched from the kitchen window as those oversized tires rolled over the exact same section again, crushing fresh sprouts I'd planted only days earlier. Saturday morning the ruts were deeper than before, and Emily walked outside beside me, stared silently at the damage, then finally asked, "So, how many weekends are you planning to fix this before you stop letting him treat our yard like a shortcut?" I didn't answer right away because the truth was, I didn't know. I believed in talking first, giving people the benefit of the doubt, solving problems like adults. But standing there looking at those muddy tire tracks cutting across something I'd spent months building, I realized I'd already had the conversation. Travis had made his decision. Now it was time for me to make mine, and unlike him, I wasn't planning to argue anymore. The next Monday, instead of buying more grass seed, I bought a notebook. It wasn't anything fancy, just a black spiral notebook that eventually became one of the most expensive things Travis ever ignored. On the first page, I wrote the date, the weather, the approximate time his truck crossed the lawn, and a simple sentence that said, visible turf damage caused by black lifted pickup entering property without permission. Then I walked into the garage, climbed a ladder, and checked the 2 weatherproof security cameras I'd installed after a package thief had wandered through the neighborhood the previous year. One camera covered the driveway. The other looked down the side yard. Until that morning, they'd mostly recorded squirrels, delivery drivers, and the occasional raccoon. Now, they had a new, full-time job. Friday evening arrived almost like clockwork. At exactly 6:18, Travis rounded the corner again. I watched from inside without making a sound. His truck bounced slightly as the oversized tires climbed onto my lawn, cut diagonally across the corner, then disappeared into his driveway. I waited until he went inside before opening the footage. Crystal clear. License plate. Time stamp. Tire tracks. Every second from a moment his front tire crossed my property line until the rear tire left it. I smiled, not because I enjoyed catching him, but because arguments suddenly seemed unnecessary. Facts don't raise their voices. They simply exist. The next morning, I measured the ruts with a steel ruler, photographed them from 4 different angles, calculated the damaged square footage, and called 3 local landscaping companies asking for estimates on repairing small sections of Bermuda turf. I wasn't trying to inflate the cost. Quite the opposite. I wanted every number to be reasonable enough that no judge could accuse me of exaggerating. Emily looked over the paperwork spread across our dining table and laughed softly. You know, she said, this is starting to look less like yard work and more like an insurance claim. I looked down at the growing stack of photographs. Good, I answered. That's exactly what I wanted to look like. That Tuesday, I mailed the first certified letter. Inside was a short, polite explanation, copies of the photographs, measurements, a printed estimate for replacing the damaged sod, and a request for reimbursement totaling $48. Not $50, not $100, just $48. The postal receipt came back 3 days later showing the letter had been delivered and signed for. Travis never responded. The following Friday evening, his truck rolled across my lawn again. By then I wasn't angry anymore. Strange as it sounds, anger had been replaced by routine. Record the footage. Photograph the damage. Measure the depth. Update the notebook. Print the new invoice. Mail another certified envelope. Week after week, the process became almost mechanical. Somewhere around the 4th incident, Mrs. Holloway from across the street wandered over while I was taking pictures. She lowered her sunglasses and asked, "Everything okay over here?" I explained what had been happening. She looked toward Travis's house, shook her head, and quietly admitted she'd seen him cutting across my yard several times while watering her flowers. "Honestly," she said, "I thought maybe you had given him permission." I smiled. "No, he gave himself permission." She chuckled at that, but there was disappointment behind the smile. Neighborhoods work because people respect invisible lines. Once someone decides those lines don't matter, everyone starts wondering where the next boundary disappears. By the 6th weekend, the damage wasn't dramatic, but it was constant. Fresh tire tread compressed healthy grass before it could recover from the previous week. The irrigation heads I'd installed so carefully were beginning to shift. One sprinkler nozzle had cracked after being hit directly by the truck's rear tire. That repair alone cost more than one of my earlier invoices. I documented everything. Every receipt, every replacement part, every photograph, every minute I spent repairing the lawn. Meanwhile, Travis carried on exactly as before. Sometimes he'd wave if he saw me mowing. Sometimes he'd nod while collecting his mail. It was almost surreal. We were living 2 completely different versions of the same story. In mine, he was repeatedly damaging my property after being asked to stop. In his, nothing important was happening at all. Around week 8, Emily asked whether I planned to take him to court. "Not yet," I answered. "I'm giving him every opportunity to make the right decision before someone else makes it for him." She raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll ever open those envelopes?" I smiled. "Oh, he's opening them." She looked confused. I pointed toward the green certified mail receipts, neatly clipped together in my folder. He's signing for every single one. That realization changed the entire situation. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. He couldn't claim ignorance. Every certified letter proved he had been informed. Every new incident happened after receiving another notice. Every fresh tire mark became evidence that the behavior was intentional. One Saturday morning, I happened to be outside trimming the hedges when Travis backed his truck out for a fishing trip. He rolled down his window. "Still sending those little invoices?" he asked with a grin that somehow managed to sound louder than his exhaust. "Every Monday," I replied calmly. He laughed. "You know I'm never paying those, right?" I shrugged. "That's your choice." He smirked. "You actually think anyone cares about a little grass?" I looked directly at him and answered, "No. I think judges care about documented property damage." His smile faded for maybe half a second before he revved the engine and drove away. It wasn't some dramatic movie moment. There wasn't shouting. There weren't threats. Just silence after one sentence landed exactly where I intended it to. Still, the next Friday he drove across my lawn again. By then I understood something about pride. Once people convince themselves they're right, admitting a mistake starts feeling more expensive than continuing it. Travis wasn't protecting his truck from backing into his driveway anymore. He was protecting his ego. Every weekend, he doubled down on a decision that had stopped making sense weeks earlier. My file kept growing. 9 incidents became 10. 10 became 11. Then 12. I organized everything inside a thick binder with labeled tabs: photographs, repair invoices, certified mail receipts, landscaping estimates, property survey, security footage logs, and a spreadsheet listing every date, every timestamp, every dollar. Looking at it all together almost made me laugh. If someone had walked into my office without context, they probably would have assumed I was preparing a lawsuit over 6 figures instead of several $100s worth of grass. Then came the 14th weekend. Heavy rain had softened the ground overnight. Travis's oversized tires sank deeper than ever before, carving 2 ugly trenches through the corner of the lawn before climbing back onto the pavement. I didn't even bother sighing anymore. I took the pictures, measured the damage, printed invoice number 14, and added the final amount to the spreadsheet. $620. 14 documented incidents. 14 signed notices. 14 opportunities for one simple apology that never came. The very next afternoon, while Emily and I were drinking iced tea on the front porch, Travis marched across the street with his arms folded tightly across his chest. I could tell from his expression he hadn't come to apologize. He stopped at the bottom of our steps and said loudly enough for half the block to hear, "We need to talk about these ridiculous bills." I set my glass down, stood up slowly, and invited him to sit at the patio table. He stayed standing. "You seriously expect me to pay over $600 for tire tracks?" he snapped. I looked at him for a moment before opening my laptop. "Actually," I said quietly, "I expect you to watch something first." As the first security video filled the screen and the timestamp appeared in the corner, the confidence I'd seen on his face for months began to shift into something much quieter. I clicked play without saying another word. The first clip showed his truck cutting across my lawn exactly the way I remembered it. The timestamp sat quietly in the corner of the screen while the oversized front tire rolled right over the survey marker I'd pointed out months earlier. Before the video even finished, I clicked the second one, then the third. By the fourth clip, Travis had stopped interrupting. His arms slowly unfolded, and he leaned forward just enough to realize this wasn't a collection of random recordings. It was a timeline. Every weekend, every shortcut, every decision. "Keep going," I said calmly, sliding the laptop a little closer to him. We still got 10 more. We watched clip after clip in complete silence. Different weather, different shirts, different weekends. The only thing that never changed was the truck leaving the pavement and entering my property. When the 14 video ended, I closed the laptop and pulled the binder toward him. "Everything in here matches the footage," I explained. "Repair estimates, photographs, certified mail receipts, landscaping invoices, the property survey, replacement parts for the sprinkler head, and every notice you signed for." He stared at the binder for several long seconds before finally speaking. "You're telling me you've been keeping track of all this over grass?" I shook my head. No, Travis. I've been keeping track of this because after I asked you to stop, you decided my property didn't deserve the same respect as yours. He opened the binder, flipping through page after page, and I could almost see the moment the situation changed in his mind. Until then, he'd been arguing with me. Now he was mentally arguing with the evidence, and evidence is a terrible opponent because it never gets emotional. You could have just talked to me again, he muttered. Emily couldn't help herself. He did, she answered before I could. You told him it was just grass. Travis looked away without replying. For the first time since we'd met, he didn't seem angry. He looked embarrassed, and those are two very different emotions. Angry people want to win. Embarrassed people just want the conversation to end. He quietly closed the binder and asked, so what now? I answered honestly, that's up to you. Either you reimburse the documented damage, or I'll file everything in small claims court next week. I'm comfortable either way. He gave a slow nod, turned around, and walked back across the street without another word. I wasn't sure what would happen after that. Part of me expected another argument. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe nothing at all. Instead, 5 days later, I opened my mailbox before work and found a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was $620 in cash, counted down to the last $20 bill. There wasn't a note. There wasn't an apology. There wasn't even a name written on the envelope. Emily looked at the money and laughed. Guess he finally watched all 14 episodes. I laughed too because she wasn't wrong. We deposited the cash, hired a landscaping company to replace the damaged sections properly, reset the sprinkler heads, and within a month the lawn looked healthier than it had before the whole mess started. But the part one remember most isn't the money or even the repaired grass. It's what happened afterward. Every Friday evening, like clockwork, I'd hear Travis's truck coming down the street. I glanced through the front window, almost out of habit. This time he'd slow down, stop completely, back carefully in his own driveway with 2 or 3 small corrections, then pull forward exactly where he needed to be. It usually took him an extra 15 seconds. Apparently my lawn had always been worth 15 seconds. A few months later we crossed paths while collecting our mail. He gave me an awkward nod and quietly said, "Yard looks good." I smiled back. "Thanks." That was the entire conversation. We never became friends again, but we also never had another problem. Looking back, I don't think this story was ever really about grass. It was about boundaries. Real ones marked by survey stakes, and invisible ones marked by respect. Too many people believe being a good neighbor means staying quiet when someone crosses the line. I learned that being a good neighbor sometimes means documenting the line clearly enough that nobody can pretend they didn't see it. You don't always have to shout. You don't always have to threaten people. Sometimes patience, preparation, and a well-organized binder accomplish more than anger ever could. But I'll leave you with one question because I'm genuinely curious what you think. If you had been in my position, after asking politely and being ignored over and over again, would you have started sending those invoices, or would you have taken him to court much sooner? Let me know down in the comments because I know this kind of neighborhood dispute always divides people. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-world conflicts where calm persistence beats arrogance every single time, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who's dealt with a difficult neighbor. Trust me, the next one might surprise you even more.